ice. You never know if it could change your life. Take a chance, you're neither wrong or right. You never know if you
take a look at this, listeners on the screen. You can't see it, but Rob can. Check out what I bought for $2 from France.
Is that a novelization of the Dungeons and Dragons movie?
Yes, by Neil Barrett Jr. There's a picture of this guy in wild evil ecstasy. Who is that? Who is the evil lead?
I don't remember who the evil guy is.
Yeah. Anyway, I got that book for $2 from Amazon from a bookseller in France, and I was just thinking, some kid in 2001, after the movie came out, asked their parents for the Dungeons and Dragons book, and they accidentally got this. Right? And they wanted the player's handbook. I was just thinking, I got it solely to think and commune with
sad.
That sad
you
kid.
You spent $2 to feel bad about yourself.
Yeah. I was like, this had to have happened. Some kid asked for the Dungeons and Dragons
the D&D book, and this is what they got.
And that's what they got. Yep.
Well, speaking of D&D, Matt, what's going on here?
Hey, it's a podcast. It's Dungeon Master of None. As the listeners point out, our acronym is DMoN, DMoN.
DMoN, very metal.
Jeremy Irons. It's Jeremy Irons.
Wait, no, Jeremy Irons isn't the bad guy. That's not true.
Yeah, he is.
No way. He's not the bad guy in the... That can't be.
Jeremy Irons plays the mage Profion, who you can see basically chewing the scenery in the movie and just like having a mage orgasm on the cover of the novelization.
Oh my god, it totally is. Wow. How did I not remember that? Oh god. I fucking love Jeremy Irons. I can't believe that I don't remember that. Well, anyway.
Yeah, I mean, Thora Birch is in it. It was like the beginning of her fall from grace from like her peak too early in American Beauty and Ghost World.
Of course, Marlon Wayans. And the lesser, the least member. No, that's not true. Who's the main actor? The least of the Stand By Me kids? Justin Whalen?
Yeah, he's a very uncharismatic lead. But we're not here to talk about the Dungeons and Dragons movie, or are we?
He's not in Stand By Me. I'm confusing him with a different, similarly looking guy.
He also looks like the kid who is the main character in Dodgeball: an Underdog Story.
I'm confusing him with Jerry O'Connell. Deep apologies to Jerry O'Connell, who is, you know, also probably not the least of the Stand By Me kids. That's clearly Will Wheaton. Sorry, Will. I apologize, but the facts are the facts. Right. I hope we haven't alienated everybody. Well, yeah, but we're not here to talk about the Dungeons and Dragons movie because that's a different podcast, which we're definitely going to do at some point.
What are we here to talk about?
We're talking about, so this is another world building episode. We're going to call this World Building 303, 302 or something like that. This is an advanced course in world building, right?
Yeah.
This is, we're getting real specific. We're getting deep into the weeds. And we're going to talk about technology.
Ooh.
And we also want, so if you've been hearing us talk about this, we're also going to spend this time with there's a specific a module, you might say, again, relating this to a college course, a module on firearms for this. So this is where our long-awaited discussion on firearms in Dungeons & Dragons specifically is going to take place. But we want to talk about technology.
Yeah, if there's one piece of technology that gets nerds more excited and more pissed off, it's consider, Rob, if you will, the simple gun.
The gun. The firearm. The pistol.
I'll have to let my dog in. Hold on.
The arquebus, the hand cannon, the bombard,
the AR-15, the assault rifle 15.
It stands for AR-15, AR-15, 15.
The AK-47, the actually killing 47.
Actually killing 47. We will be talking about clips and magazines, and we will be incorrectly...
And we will confuse bullet with shell.
But yeah, we'll talk about firearms, but yeah...
but more broadly about technology.
Well, this is actually a pretty important part of world building, I think. that is often overlooked or ignored. So I'm excited to talk about this.
Yeah, like I was playing in a friend's game, and it's like, oh, can my character have spectacles? Like, do spectacles exist yet? You know, it's these kind of questions. Sometimes they're in the background, sometimes they're in the foreground, but it's something you should do at least 10 minutes of thinking about.
Yeah. I think this is a very important part. I usually do this last or close to the end because I usually have sort of like a general theme in mind, but it's important to think about. So let's go back to first principles, Matt. Let's what do we mean when we say technology? Does that just mean steam engines and firearms and, you know, cotton gins but what do we mean when we say technology?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's a broader consideration of not sort of technology as sort of a playing Civ 4 linear tech tree
Yes.
of things you unlock and what is unlocked or locked in your world. I think that's a bad way to think about things. I think it's better to think about, as a historian or an anthropologist might, about broader life ways and patterns of production, the economy, and how that relates to social and cultural norms in your world, right? If everyone in your world is a hunter-forager, right, that's going to give you a very different world than if you have industrial agriculture.
And I think we Westerners especially have a real problem, and also nerds have been trained on this by decades of playing Civilization. We think of technology as like specific like material tool advancements, right? Like the plow, the stirrup, the wheel. But like crop rotation is a technology, right? Understanding how to
wind patterns or
right.
the Volta du Mar of the Atlantic Ocean is
being able to, like what Polynesians do, like learning to sail by the stars, like across, you know, vast spaces. That's a technology, right? That is a learned, advancement. So we're not just talking about, you know, specific tools, you know, metallurgy, metallurgy and, you know, woodworking and, you know, putting things together and making devices, though that is technology as well. And it's also important to remember that technology doesn't disappear necessarily. When we're talking about, like, broadly talking about technology, like, it is correct that we no longer use buggy whips, right? Because we have cars, but we still use hammers, right? Technology is both.
Why did your mind go first to buggy whips, Rob?
Well, that's the like the joke about, like, you know, car manufacturers made buggy whip manufacturers extinct. That's the.
I just thought you were really into buggy whips. Which is fine.
No, sorry, it's a dumb like economics thing. It's like you don't like every time like a tech dork is like, you know, you want to be on the cutting edge of technology. They talk about being a buggy whip manufacturer because they all went out of business, right? But
that makes sense.
People still make hammers. Sorry,
right.
I'm not. It's not a BDSM thing, Matt.
Okay, all right.
Not playing to our horny base.
Well, to all our base listening, hopefully you enjoyed that last section, and stay horny. We love you.
Stay horny.
All
stay
right.
woke. Anyway, so when we talk about technology, it's a broad. We're talking from like historical and anthropological terms. Like
right.
it's a broad way of referring to human advancements and human developments. You know, above and beyond everything from like fire to, like I said, you know, learning wind patterns or like, you know, astronomy or crop rotation to like systems of government.
Yeah,
you know,
systems of government shaped by technology.
Yeah.
Right, some examples of that. For example, you can take, for me, right, my understanding of how to, like, set up a Dark Sun campaign, right? You've got a feel of the sort of city-states of an arid Mesopotamia, where there are small islands of production, where all that production is then, and technology that enables it is then drained by these, you know, parasitic cities. And then beyond that, everyone else is a nomadic hunter-forager living on the edge, right? And there's not a lot of metal, which, you know, shapes that technological world, right? Or you could go with something like Forgotten Realms, where everything is vaguely feudal. Cities, right, require vast hinterland of farmlands that have to be fought back from the wilderness. And where most of the people, though, are still hunters and foragers, as a recent tweet from Ed Greenwood said that the most populous species on Faerun are number 1, goblins, number 2, orcs. Humans are probably number 3 or 4, according to the creator. My mind was blown. So
mind blown. So it's also important to remember that technology is part of a network, right, of related technologies, right? So famously, and this is of dubious truth, but the Romans had the understanding and technology to theoretically create steam engines or complicated mechanical devices, but they did not have the metallurgical or the desire or the need to create these particular devices.
They had the engine we call millions of slaves.
Exactly. So, and this is an important point that I'd like to come back to, but like, you don't need to create a steam engine if you have slaves. They serve the same function as...
You do need to create a steam engine if you have really complicated coal mines that flood easily.
Yes.
Which is why the English steam engine was successful.
You also need a steam engine to move things quickly across the countryside, right? If a railroad requires some sort of more advanced engine, you cannot, no matter how many slaves you have, you cannot push a train fast enough.
I pissed Rob off here. Hey, Rob, the Romans did invent a whole room to vomit in. They called it a vomitorium.
That's actually...
I'm just fucking with you. Yeah.
Okay.
I'm just trying to get you to launch into a rant here.
The vomitorium was the exit from the Colosseum. However, the Romans did have, they did do the thing where they would vomit. It's just like they didn't have a specific room for it. Okay, fuck you.
That's my favorite thing that I've heard 100 times in my life. That is completely wrong.
Well, it's funny. Sorry. There is a room called a vomitorium. It's where people exit, because the word vomit means to exit. You come out of the Colosseum. Anyway. Dumbasses. Anyway, so and another related story is that by many reckonings, the metallurgy, the metal, the iron that was developed in West Africa in the pre-colonial era was of better quality than that which was created in Europe. They just didn't have quite as much, right? So they didn't develop, they didn't make tons of fucking swords, but the swords and iron spearheads that they made were of substantially better quality. They just had fewer iron mines, right? Fewer iron sources. So this is an important thing to think about when you're thinking about technology, right? What's its quality, but also how much of it can you make, how widespread is it? How common? Again, in the Andes, they did not have, the Incans did not have wheels except on children's toys, because wheels are fucking useless in the mountains, right? They understood how wheels worked. They just didn't put them on carts because it was better to have alpacas haul things up and down the terraces. Right.
They didn't have horses to haul carts up, and if you want to haul a hand cart up a 30-degree incline for 3 miles, be my guest.
Yeah, have a good time. Yeah. So I guess the main thing that I'm doing here is I want to encourage you all to think a little bit more broadly than just, it's feudal Western Europe. There are horses and big fields and everybody is feudal and lives in castles, right? Not only is that boring, but it doesn't really reflect the real technological situation in the Middle Ages or really more broadly. As we well know, at the same time that, Western, Europeans were living in castles and farming staple crops, they had rockets and the printing press and, early firearms in China and in Korea. And, they had all sorts of interesting things elsewhere in the world.
And I think the parallel thing is that technological advancement which is a bad way to think about it, but if you're going to do it in that way, should be able to come from many different places, right? For 1,000 years, Polynesians sailed across vaster distances of oceans more successfully than anyone would be able to do until really the late 16th century, right? The Spanish were sailing across the Pacific, but they almost died every time they came back.
Yeah, every
They're
time.
This is only worth it because we make 5,000% profit.
Right. You know,
And
every time
we almost starve to death every time we come back. But it's
it's worth it. It's the profit margin is so high, it doesn't matter that, you know,
love those Manila gallons.
30% of our crew dies or gets scurvy, and, you know, every other Gillian sinks.
Doesn't matter. It's
just
fucking silk worth so much.
Yeah,
all right,
if you survive, yeah.
And then the other thing is, like, for example, talking about the Incas, right? A center of technological development doesn't have to be, you know, or the main population center of your campaign world doesn't have to be a city surrounded by what you think of as flat farmlands on a river valley, right? You know, the Incas had very large cities, and they did it by exploiting the mountainous terrain, right? Growing different crops at different times of year at different latitudes, giving them the multiple growing seasons we associate with, like, slightly tropical temperate areas, right? But in unforgiving mountain terrain.
And this is an important distinction also, is that to get away from the whole, like, you earn points for having more technology, civilization way of thinking about things, because what really makes you can't measure a society in terms of, like, better or worse. I would encourage you to never think about one, you know, society or civilization or culture is good or bad or better or worse. But even above and beyond that, there are other ways to measure the success of a people than how many cars they have, or, you know, whether or not they invented the plow or the wheel, or, you know, sailing vessels or firearms or cannons. Like, how many people live safely and comfortably in their, you know, empire? Like, you know, do the people get enough to eat? Do they live in harmony with nature? You know, what is the, you know, what values and what, you know, how has the environment and history shaped your, you know, your world that you were building?
Rob, let me swivel my chair around and straddle it backwards and get real and jam with you for a second as a historian. One you know, way to think about the history of the last, you know, 5,000 years of human history until the very recent past as a time when people who are, quote, barbarians, unquote, did very, very well preying off the people who we normally consider more technologically advanced. Who these barbarians, whether they are horse nomads or other raiding or mercenary people who are wain riders or chariot riders, who are living on the fringes, coming in, lived more safely and securely, healthier, better, and longer lives by being like, hey, thanks for living in the dirt as slaves or practical slaves, agricultural, technologically advanced people. We're going to come every couple years or months and take some of your shit and then go back to where it's nice.
That's true.
And this happened for 5,000 years of human history.
And listen, this is an uncomfortable fact, but the moment that people started living in towns and farming, they immediately became less healthy. Their, like, bodies changed. They had more disease. You know, they became physically less fit.
To add a nuance to that argument, the moment that state structures imposed more stringent control of people who were horticulturalists or agriculturalists, then you see the drop. Early agriculturalists before the formation of states lived very well, and they lived off multiple lifeways, hunting migratory fowls and deer and turtles and all sorts of things. Well,
the takeaway is that
when people got enslaved,
right? Like, semi-nomadic, great, you know, limited, you know, unstructured or less structured state-sponsored farming still works. But the truth is, and I'm a fan of civilization, I think probably okay. I don't know. It's really hard to say better or worse than if we had stayed wandering around.
Yeah, we all want to be part of the original leisure class.
But the truth is that, generally in terms of health and equality and all sorts of outcomes, not great to begin with. Early states, great if you were king or a priest or a warlord. Not so great if you were one of the vast majority of people who had to farm for a living. Or
Now, all that being said, bring it back to your own world building and your own campaign, right? I think if you can come up with a very complicated set of technologies and lifeways for your world, that's good. It's also not too bad to, like, you know, come to your players and give them something they can easily grapple with,
Right.
Living in a world where everyone is a hunter-forager might work if you have some other technologies or magics, right, where players can more easily relate to them. Because, we live very differently than those people, and if every character in the campaign has to be someone from that, your players might be a little alienated.
And look, we understand that it's probably easier to say, this is
Renaissance Europe.
This is Renaissance Europe, this is, Arthurian England, and people live in castles, and they have taverns, and there are farms, and, they ride horses. But I do want to encourage you to be a little bit to think about that, right? And this is specifically
what
interesting.
Technologies or life ways can you add or take away that might make things a little more spicy?
Because it gets a little bit complicated if you try to get real weird, and you're like, okay, players, there's no horses, everybody rides giant ostriches, and, everybody lives in, distributed, nomadic yurts, because if you gather too closely, then sky dragons eat you, and, you can do that, but, it gets, it's hard, people need something to, sort of, ground themselves. So you need sort of, a general thematic anchor, right? So that your players have an idea of what's going on. But you can so here's a great example of this is, of course, Eberron, right? Eberron is recognizably a Renaissance, late medieval civilization with some magic punk, steampunk technologies that, sort of elevate it above and beyond. But it's easy to understand, right? People live in cities, there's broad, tracts of farmland, people still sail about in ships, the ships just happen to be fueled by elementals. So that's pretty easy for people to grasp.
My favorite example similar to that, Rob, is the world of Avatar: The Last Airbender, which starts off in a very medieval world, but people have magical powers. It allows one group of people to live in mountaintops, and what do they do with that? Instead of invading things, they just become monks, right?
Right.
It allows another group of people to live in polar ice caps, and another group to start an industrial revolution and have a bit of a technological change.
That's a great example. So you don't have to radically change things or make it unrecognizable. You just got to think about how this might impact your people. And I think this is especially interesting with D&D, and this is what I love about Eberron, and I want everybody to think a little bit harder about this when you're world building, because if you're in a high magic world, right, or even in a medium magic world, how does that change the technology of your people group, right? If somebody can easily cast teleport or message or any number of things, how does transportation or communication change? Rather than having a Pony Express, maybe there's a series of towers where, mages message each other to more or less instantaneously transmit letters or whatever, a little primitive telegraph.
Which might mean there's a whole guild of low-level mages in service of the military. Maybe all wizards are part of the military in this kingdom.
Or maybe they're their own powerful message guild or communicators guild that exerts influence over the towns around them. And one thing that I'm always coming back to, because the more history you read, the more you realize until the very recent past that clean water is one of the most critical and most limiting aspects of civilization building. If you have mages that can just create water, how does that change the dynamics of your world? And you don't have to frankly, I think these things would be radically changing, but you don't have to get deep in the dirt and all weird about what it's going to do. But just think about how having easy access to magic might adjust the way that civilization has developed, and who might have power, how technology might have advanced differently, what different technologies might exist.
And if you want to cut something out, right, of your campaign, right, if you're well, there's no. If you're using the base D&D rules, don't do this. But if you're there's no plate armor in my world, or something that your characters interact with, or, no one uses metal weapons, is there, for example, a god whose clerics are devoted to killing anyone who would invent such a thing. They have the divination spell, and they hunt these people down before they're, after they're born, and they murder them.
This is an interesting thing, too, because technology is not universally accepted and does not like emerge spontaneously and or permitted by the ruling classes. Oftentimes it is suppressed. I read this book recently by Tim Wu called The Master Switch, and it talks about how a lot of communications technologies were essentially suppressed by both like Bell Labs and the government, often working together, even as they advanced other communications technologies. But they things like the answering machine have been around since the 50s, right? But did not like broadly catch on because they were not. That's true. It's true. Master Switch is a really good book. If it's like, the thing is, like, a technology can emerge, but maybe there's like a group of people who, if you do want to like have like a lower tech world, maybe there's a guild of mages or a guild of clerics or just a bunch of like high powered Luddites who just go around smashing every steam engine or loom or whatever. And
the great god Lud and his servants, the
great
Luddites.
God Lud, which is a super fun dynamic. I think I always like this is the Arcanum dichotomy. I love having like tech and magic be sort of like opposed to each other. That's always like a fun, it's like not like a super unique idea, but it's a fun like little like, especially choosing your like making your players sort of like pick a side, right? Are they pro magic, are they pro tech, are they trying to like unite the two? But think about what your relationship between magic, if you do have a high magic world, how does it relate? If you've got a low magic world, like what's the reason for that? Has technology advanced to fill the gap?
Right. Or, you can take the Eberron approach, which there's been no need for what we would consider technological advancements, because magic is studied as and viewed as a science by the people of the world.
Yeah.
And so it's replaced that. I think lots of folks, and again, we can say the thing that we say all the time, which is, not every game works best with the rule set of Dungeons & Dragons.
Yes.
Maybe use a different system. But even within the Dungeons & Dragons system, permits and has always permitted since the earliest days of the game more than just things going on this quasi-historically imagined medieval Europe, right?
Right.
So we encourage you to add things that are not there. If you wanted to set a Dungeons & Dragons game that had sci-fi technology, I think you could do that quite easily.
And that's old school. That goes back to, a Journey to the Barrier Peaks. Like that's, there's always been a chance for you to find a weird-ass laser rifle and your players don't know what it is. But that's not a new idea. That is old school D&D. If it doesn't fit with like the theme of your game, don't put it in. But if they want to like stumble across a weird alien technology and find something that does, that shoots laser beams, that's cool and fine, and the rules work okay with it. You know?
Right. I mean, the assumption is if you give players a weapon that as a laser rifle does 3d6 damage per shot, that's going to make certain characters who have them much more powerful. But, that can be fine for your game, right? Just consider the consequences. All right, Rob, I think we should get a little more specific.
Are we going to talk about firearms? Is it time? Let's talk about firearms.
Well,
okay.
All right. And I want to say is that for me, Rob, the always most inspiring stories and time is that sort of Three Musketeers, Age of Sail, swashbuckling action and adventure. And while you can certainly have that as any Errol Flynn, Robin Hood movie can show us, without firearms really fit into that kind of stuff.
You and I are similar in this. I love that pulp adventure. I love the swashbuckling. I love the Three Musketeers. I love, the Black Pirate. And, I also love, the Jacobite rebellions and the Highlanders, the Highland Charge, great, broadswords and claymores, being used to fight, flintlocks and muskets. I love that time period. And it's such like an interesting and adventurous and dynamic time. And
are you pro Outlander or anti-Outlander?
I'm generally pro Outlander. I think that it is better than it is bad, I guess. Okay. It's a very horny book and it's a very horny show. But it has pretty decent history.
Okay, cool.
I think
I should watch it. All right, yeah. No, and firearms, so I think there's like there are dungeon masters who I have met who would be like, there will never be guns in my D&D campaign. And you know what? If that is your attitude, that's fine.
That's fine.
There is a certain like tonal shift in our mind, especially if we're here in North America. I feel like guns are like such a part of like popular storytelling, and they change the way stories are told, right? How many tales end with someone pulls a gun on someone and they say, now talk, right?
Yeah.
It's different. I mean, I guess you do it with a crossbow, but it feels different,
It's
right?
not the same. But it's, I think not only is it like a little ahistorical, because guns were around earlier than you think they were. They just didn't catch on for a lot of reasons. But also, and it has less to do with the guns themselves and has more to do with professional armies and the cost of manufacturing them and ideas of chivalry and combat and, you know...
I read a great book by Priya Satya, Empire of Guns, The Violent Making of the Industrial Revolution. In many ways, guns made the industrial economy of the modern age, right? The ideas of making guns and that making guns on a massive scale.
Yeah, my main complaint is not that people don't want to have guns in their campaign. My complaint is that it feels to be like the default, right? DMs are like, there are no guns, and then a lot of them will say, I don't want any guns in my campaign. But, you know, I just think that it just misses out on so many, both like how history was, and also many interesting stories and themes. So in 1422, the first siege of Constantinople, the Ottomans brought some of the very first bombards to lay siege to that city, and they were created by this mysterious Hungarian, what's his name?
Keanu Reeves. Dracula.
Keanu Reeves. Is it
Victor Orban?
It's
Time
Urban. No, it's
traveler.
Urban. It's literally Urban. Or I was like, no, it really was. And I was like, is that right?
Fuck.
But this guy who is sort of like lost to history, and these gigantic guns, like the Dardanelles guns, and it's just like such like a God, the story of like that siege has such drama to it, and like you don't have to have like guns be common, but having like a group of people with guns is interesting, and it doesn't have the rules. So let's talk about the rules of the firearms, because
inevitably these discussions break down to these rules, and I think a lot of rule resistance to guns. Some of it's thematical, some of it's mechanical, right? You have characters who want to be good archers or something like that, but if a gun is better, then maybe you've invalidated their character concept, right?
Right, and so I feel like the thematic objections are misguided, because I think there's so many interesting ways you can include guns without changing the feel of your game. But I also think the mechanical objections are a little misguided, because guns are pretty well balanced, right? As
5th
as they
edition
are,
Dungeons and Dragons gives us rules for guns on pages 267 and 268 of the Dungeon Master's Guide. Guns are a ranged weapon that do, for a pistol, 1d10, or a musket, 1d12, and have the loading property, which means it takes a full action to load them. Though, actually, it might say it takes an action or a bonus action. So you could fire what is described as more or less a flintlock or a matchlock gun once every turn, which is obviously incredibly historically inaccurate.
Oh, it's inaccurate, and yet it's still relatively balanced. That is, by the way, far more often, as we have correctly put it out, that you can fire a pistol or a musket. But again, doing 1d10 or 1d12 damage per round at range is not any better than what any martial character can put out. Yeah. And I think
slightly better than a heavy crossbow and slightly better than a light crossbow, right? But if you're a fighter with the archery ability and you shoot 3 arrows on your turn, that's got to be way better.
That's going to be way better every time. So the way these are designed, and I agree with this, is it's basically you open your combat and you pull your pistol and you fire it, and then you draw your sword and go about your, like, again,
which is a feel I have always wanted to get in my campaign, but Rob, I've struggled to get players to create the incentives to get players to do that sometimes.
I have too. I've always loved it. It's hard to balance guns. Either they don't want to use guns at all, or they want to use them all the time.
Right.
I mean, that's
a natural thing, right? Players realize the best way mechanically to play the system is to pick one thing you're good at and to do that almost every time, right? No player's like, well, I want to be slightly good at archery and then slightly good at hand-to-hand combat and then slightly good at casting spells and be not very good at all three, though I often like making characters like that.
I also tend to make characters that are good at all, or okay at all three, but that's not mechanically optimal.
I suppose you could take these gun rules and up the damage slightly and say they take a minute to reload, so it's like you just don't reload these in combat.
And I think that may be the closest way to do this right for the right feel. But the point is that you can easily, as written, include these, both for your players and for enemies, without really breaking the balance of your game. And there are games with better rules and there are games with worse rules, but I do think that this is actually something that D&D is okay at. We've talked a lot about how D&D isn't the best system for reflecting a lot of things, but I think the guns work pretty well in this edition of D&D. I think that there aren't a lot of ways to cheese it to get extra attacks or, abuse gun firing.
Right. If you can use the crossbow master feat to remove the loading property from guns, you could supposedly fire them more often during a round if you have the extra attack feature. But still, you're not doing much more. You're spending a whole feat to do half a die more damage. Yeah.
Still probably not as good as a longbow fighter that's specialized in that.
The only thing that will bug me is someone shooting what is described as a flintlock rifle 3 times in 6 seconds. But you could always describe it as, you've developed a slightly better mechanism for loading, a breech loading paper cartridge or a spinning wheel lock. And I love having guns in because one of my favorite things, I think I'm stealing this from War Machine, is there are these like little models called gun mages that look like 3 musketeers, swashbucklers. They wear tricorn hats, but they also shoot guns that shoot spells at people. There was a great spell slinger subclass from the Pathfinder edition. Now I want to write a spell slinger subclass for 5th edition. I'm gonna go do that.
You do not have to put firearms in your game, but the reason I wanted to talk about this is because this is just like a great focal point for the technology conversation. Because if you're going to exclude firearms from your game, I do think you should ask yourself why. And I do think this often goes unexamined. And if it's a thematic reason, that's okay. You just don't like the feel of it. But I would encourage you to push yourself a little bit. If you're working on being a better DM, a better world builder, ask yourself why there aren't firearms. Come up with a reason for it. And I would also, because I like this, I would say, maybe give some people guns. Say that guns exist and maybe they're rare, maybe they're expensive, maybe only one nation or empire or even like a guild of gunsmiths has them.
There's a great example of this, at least in our popular imagination, of the history of the Tokugawa shogunate, right? Yes. Where, since the kingdom is at peace except for banditry, right? There's no major wars between large rival armies, right? Only one class of people has swords and weapons and guns are rare. So even though people have the technology for guns, most fights end up being dramatic battles between blade masters.
And this is played super well in the Seven Samurai, of course, where the vast majority of the movie is exciting sword battles by master samurai. But
and then 2 hours in the movie, they're like, they got some guns, let's go steal some of them. And they're like, guns,
right? But then again, it doesn't like fundamentally change the beautiful sword fighting doomed last stand. It just it adds like a complicating element, you know?
Rob, shall we get specific about, for just a little bit, for 5 or 10 minutes or so, about our own game worlds and what technology we've thought about in relation to them?
Sure. Well, I want to start with yours because this is interesting because yours is a spacefaring world. So I'm curious about what you thought about with technology with regards to, to yours.
I think what I've decided to do, Wild Space is a sort of Spelljammer like space fantasy where the main technology, right, is ships that can travel among the stars, right? And I've decided to take what we were talking about earlier and combine magic and technology. So these ships are, wooden sailing vessels equipped with cannons and all of our favorite tropes of the Age of Sails, but they have, magic sails that let them harness sunlight, right, to sail the currents of gravity and the winds from stars between planets. But they also have, magic is super important, right? They also have on the ship a sort of spell casting ritual room, which lets you plane shift the ship to another plane where the dimensions of physics work a little bit differently, a hyperspace, if you will. I haven't decided what that plane is ultimately going to look like. I have a couple options. So you can travel between solar systems really quickly. I've got the swashbuckling feel, but there's no need to really, other than saying that firearms and cannons are available, because you can't have fights between ships without cannons, in my opinion, are the same, other than adding in on page 268 of the DMG the rules for pistols and muskets and the rules for cannons, which are given in a different part of the DMG. I'm not really changing the rules much. There's no reason why players couldn't also have bows and arrows and wear armor. Those things are all still super useful. As opposed to thinking about technology and how it works, right? I want my main setting to be a place that has recently undergone a revolution of independence and liberation. I haven't decided if this is what I actually want to do, but I want to say that the people who invaded brought the technology of the spelljammers that are classic Age of Sail ships, except they have masts in radial directions going up and down and left and right. So, because space has no up and down, and big cannons mounted on them. But before those invading empires arrived, the people who lived in the planets of the starting system traveled between different worlds. Maybe the elves built gates between different worlds or walked their strange paths between them. Maybe humans had a sort of smaller ships that could sail between worlds in dangerous and exciting journeys, kind of drawing on, the Polynesians, right? They sailed just as far, but, they're not ships that could mount war or invasions.
Right. I love it.
Maybe dwarfs tunneled to the center of each planet and found there a portal of fiery energy that they could use to go between worlds, something like that. So I'm gonna have that. They didn't possess all the components of this technology, but they possessed many technologies of their own. But broadly, Age of Sail meets Dungeons and Dragons.
I love it. Like I said, I do this last, so I haven't thought too much about this with the Darien scheme. But the example that I mentioned, the towers of mages messaging each other, that is something that I have thought about and put in the Darien scheme. So you've got, it's a guild of mages, of sorcerers specifically, not mages, who mostly rely on the messaging or the message cantrip, right? Something any first level sorcerer or wizard can learn.
Yes.
And they have a network of, I guess, we'll call them substations, but towers where they can message each other, right? 120 feet away. And so it creates a network of communication across the entire city. And they've set this up in every major port. And then between cities, they have a larger sending network with higher level mages to, to quickly relay information, sort of like a telegraph, 25 words.
Because sending, unlike message, has no range, right? Limit
no
on
range.
the same plane of words.
So it requires fewer mages. And they call themselves the Speakers Guild, which is ironic because they do not speak. They communicate entirely with the message cantrips. And so they are theoretically independent, but obviously control a great deal of wealth and power and have mysterious motives. But this is one of the things I wanted to do with this world is think about colonialism and think about networks of power and knowledge and communication. And so I'm always thinking about, again, if there's a lot of people who can do magic, one of the most important things, they're not going to be all casting fireballs. They're all going to be casting message, right? Communication is more powerful than blowing people up. And I haven't fully forming this out, but there's also a distributed network of, I'm calling them something like pilgrims, who travel to farms and to villages, and they're first level clerics, and they create they purify food and water, right? They clean wells, and they heal the sick, and they these very basic cleric cantrips and first level spells that would be critically important and incredibly powerful. And these are mostly do-gooders. They have taken a vow of poverty, and they're associated with one of the major faiths. I haven't decided which one yet. But there's I have an idea for all of these different sort of if you're lacking a very powerful state apparatus, which is one of the things that's happening in this world, then you have I like the idea of these sort of distributed networks of people who have either created their own power, or because magic gives power to people in a very interesting way, are able to sort of create their own systems of technology, their own, networks of power, and what they would do with it, and, without behaving in these sort of dangerous and interesting ways, how they would respond to the threat of, or the challenge of, civilizing a dangerous world.
So, important question, are there guns? Where's my guns?
That's a great question. I haven't decided. There probably are guns. I think they're probably going to be guns, and they're also going to, I like,
could be alchemical guns, right?
Yeah, I like Magitech guns, right? I don't know, it's a stick that shoots a laser, but it's Scorching Ray or something. So, I sort of skirt the gun question by having what Eberron does, basically wands that anybody can use. That's they're expensive and difficult, but they basically are a gun, right? It can...
Right. I think under 5th edition rules, anyone can attune to a wand that shoots many different types of things. Like a wand of lightning bolts, right, requires a spellcaster. A wand of magic missiles, anyone who's got that can shoot a magic missile. You make a wand of, what's the 1d10 cantrip? Firebolt, right?
Firebolt,
that anyone can use, and it has...
That's basically a rifle.
It
has
a pistol.
Yeah.
It has 1 shot per day, right? So don't miss, or 2 shots per day.
Like you, I also think that, seafaring adventures are no fun without cannons. So there will either be cannons, or there will basically
siege staffs.
Yeah, there will basically be
giant wands that are
big
not cannons.
Fireball shooting, implements that are basically cannons.
I do love the idea of wands and wand slingers and siege staffs instead of cannons, and I almost went that, but I the roar of gunpowder and smoke drifting away from spaceships
too critical for Age of Sail.
Sounds too cool to me.
Yeah.
So
I'm not sure yet. I also do love cannons and swashbuckling, but I think I'm going to lean a bit more towards weird magic and artifice, but they will basically be guns and cannons, just reskinned a bit. Anything else you want to address specifically for our technology episode?
I think that about covers it, Rob. It was a pleasure chatting with you about guns.
This was a fun one. Talk about guns. My favorite gun is the Assault Rifle 15, and I love putting a clip in it and firing it down range.
Actually, Rob, you and I, we fired black powder guns once.
Yeah, here's
right?
the thing:
shooting black powder guns is super fun.
It's fun. Matt and I are both super awful libs. However, I want to be clear: we also both grew up in the South and in Texas, and we have absolutely fired plenty of guns, shotguns and rifles and.
I fired so many guns, I've shot my own dick off. I just want everyone to know that. I don't want anyone to have any doubts.
Black powder shooting is super fun. Yeah, in Boy Scouts, yeah, it smells like very like, yeah, you can just like smell it for like all over the place.
Victory.
Smells like victory. If you have questions about anything we talked about, if you have thoughts about technology, if you have questions about like what you'd like us to cover in future world building episodes, absolutely let us know. Write us at DMoNs@gmail.com. Oh wait, hang on. I'm sorry, everybody.
It's time to get to our letters. Speaking of that,
we're going to answer letters before I get to our closing statement. Sorry, letters first.
Rob, you want to read our question from Gerard?
Gerard, sure. This one comes from Gerard from the Nederlands. Willkommen, Gerard. He writes, Dear Matt and Rob, longtime listener, second-time writer. I remember your first letter, though not what it was about. Thanks for your continued great work. Please keep it up. You are an inspiration to DMs everywhere, toiling away in the trenches of tabletop RPGs. Yes, DMs are the hardworking backbone of the community. Never let anybody tell you otherwise. Gerard has 3 questions for us.
Okay.
1. What are your thoughts on the announcement of Baldur's Gate 3? Quickly, I love it. Yeah. I'm excited. I can't wait. So
the studio's the Divinity Studio, right?
It's the Divinity Studio. I probably played Baldur's Gate 1 and 2 more than maybe any other game in my past. I love Baldur's Gate so much. Great fun games. I hope that it is great. I refuse to entertain any thoughts that it might not be great. I'm so excited for it.
Yeah, I mean, and so the thing we got from the teaser trailer for people who saw it shows a person undergoing seromorphosis. And Rob may remember this a little bit from one of my campaigns, which is the process in which a mind flayer or an illithid reproduces. And it just reminds me, the fucking illithids are the best villain.
Ooh.
Back in their lore,
they're alien and horrifying.
They're
and
from
malicious.
The future, gone back in time to fix the past, so they can rule everything. And if there's tell me a better like weird backstory for something. I challenge
They've got
you.
Alien minds and alien, motivations, and they're horrifying and hard to fight. And, such good villains. I'm so excited.
Thoughts?
Second question.
All good so far. Good villains, good studio, etc.
Yeah. What are your thoughts on Mike Merles? I was listening to episode 150 of the System Mastery podcast, where they weren't, let's say, very diplomatic in their thoughts on him. I did appreciate their description of him as a giant thumb in a polo shirt, though.
Oh, that's fucking savage. System Mastery is a great show. I haven't listened to that episode, though. Mike Merles is back. I think he's back on, like, panels. He hasn't tweeted anything yet or said anything on his own, but he's been, like, retweeting stuff. So, Mike Merles has escaped all punishment or judgment for just being a generally shitty human being. So, that's not great.
He was tepid and silent on things that he should not have been,
and actively promoted harm,
and actively both. And he's a decent, he's a good like system designer and DM,
I guess. Do you love 4th edition?
No.
Okay.
I just I've watched a couple of his his streams where he like designs a subclass, and I like where his head's at. But
so cool, he can. If Wizards of the Coast fired Mike Merles, the game would not be worse. It might even get better.
Matt is correct. He's also part of the old guard that has prevented the game from truly innovating. And you can tell that he's had less hands on the more interesting recent modules. So we're not huge fans. I don't have any strong feelings about him. I'm incredibly disappointed in his failure to do the right thing. But also I have learned that nerds of a certain age just can't be expected to do that. And so I no longer let myself feel angry, but yeah, I'm not a huge fan.
If there was justice in the world, he would have been fired after.
He would have been fired.
He did a pretty heinous thing that if your best friend in the world did it, you're should I be friends with this person anymore?
Do we want to remind the listeners what Mike Merles did that he got in trouble for?
The thing that it's not that he hired a couple Nazis and this dude who's been a serial abuser, Zach Smith, to consult on 5th edition. It's that when people confronted him about this person being really shitty, instead of passing it along to HR as any normal corporate stooge might, he just took it upon himself to send the list of names of the people who were saying, this person's abused me, to their abuser, right? Which is bad. That is a bad, pretty evil thing, right? So that's what he did. And yeah, he should not be there anymore, but the game wouldn't be, we don't need him. I don't think there's any reason he should stick around. I guess he's working on Baldur's Gate 3. I don't know.
Well, so that's the next question. Gerard asks, does your answer to question 2 affect the answer on question 1? And from what I can tell, Merles is involved, but only in the sense that it is a D&D game.
Right.
Not, I think, in the direct, creation of Baldur's Gate 3. So no, right now it does not affect my opinion on Baldur's Gate 3. Again, he is not so terrible that everything he touches must be avoided, obviously.
The roundest head in the D&D team was asked to leave and left. The Dungeons & Dragons, as it's been since 5th edition, would not get worse. And it could get better. So, there's no reason for him to stick around.
He should resign. Nothing bad would happen if he went and did something else. But yeah, good question, Gerard. And thanks for writing.
Yeah, thanks for writing.
Hopefully we have not disappointed you with our answers. I don't think that Baldur's Gate must be avoided. I don't think he's all that involved, but I guess that remains to be seen.
There's a lot of, I can't, I have not the critical language or the position in our society to think about these things, but there's a lot of people work on this video game. Hopefully it's not a Mike Merles production. That would change things, right? If he is the auteur behind this video game, that could change my mind, but I don't think he is. Baldur's Gate's the third of a series, so
right.
Okay.
So again, Merles has his big grubby fingerprints on everything D&D, and that's unfortunate. But I think he's less critical to the whole process than he used to be. So it is complicated to deal with consuming and interacting with art that is created by people who are not great. Nerds have been dealing with this with Orson Scott Card for as long as Ender's Game has been around. We maybe should talk about that in depth later, but just for right now, just be conscientious about it.
Yeah. All right. Thanks again, Gerard. Here is an email from John. John writes, "Hey guys, I really enjoy the podcast as a wonderful stream of new ideas and ways of thinking about the game. As an example, your talk about world-building species was awesome. Your ideas about halfling nomads spurred an idea of making them into a Roma-themed culture, but without the negative connotations that come with that notion IRL. Your discussion about gnomes got me thinking that maybe they were created by a trickster god who stole or tampered with one of the other god's creations to make his own and got imprisoned for it, leaving the gnomes godless and without clerics of their own, which would explain their dedication to the arcane arts instead. A player who wished to play a gnome cleric could still do so, but with a different god as their divine source of power. In the last episode, you addressed the issue of the unclarity or at least tucked away rule of casting one spell per round. I belong to the category of DMs who got into D&D at 5th edition and caught that rule more by chance than anything else, but I still struggle to explain it in a cohesive manner to my players. It's an easily forgotten rule by players, but I think I have a framing that might make it easier for players to remember. You may, quote, you may only use one spell slot per round, unquote. I'm not sure if this would trip up paladins and the likes who use spell slots for smites, but that may be easier to give an exception to the rather roundabout way of the current explanation. My group recently moved to Dungeon World because most of the players preferred a more lightweight system, so I haven't had the opportunity to try it out live, but one of my friends took up the mantle of Game Master, so I'm not complaining. I was curious to hear your thoughts on that framing. Kind regards, John.
I like that, actually. Matt, maybe you can correct me, but I think that generally captures the intent. There are some corner cases, like John mentioned, with smites.
You may only cast using one spell slot per round, and there you go. That takes care of that corner case.
Yeah, I actually really like that.
That's really good.
John, that's pretty elegant.
Dungeon World is lots of fun, too. Encourage all of our listeners to try Dungeon World or any Powered by the Apocalypse system if you haven't yet.
Yeah, hey, listen, actually, mad props to John. That's actually a really good framing. It's not perfect, which is probably why 5th edition didn't use that, but it's way easier to understand and follow and tell your players, like, look, you can only expend one spell slot when casting spells per round. I guess. Something like that. Still better than trying to explain the whole cantrip, blah, 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 action thing, which, again, is very difficult to grasp at first.
And I like your suggestion about gnomes. I think I'm going to take it, I'm going to turn that up to 11 and make it that gnomes accidentally killed their god. The gnome clerics killed their god by accident.
Their god,
they're trying to do something nice for him, give him some power, and they fucking overcharged him and popped his head like a balloon.
Yeah, I love it. Thanks for writing, John. That's good stuff. Now we're done. So, yeah, if you have any thoughts on technology or thoughts on world building, on guns, on what we should talk about in the future, let us know. Write us at dmofnone@gmail.com. Add us on Twitter at dmofnone. You can also call us
at the Dungeon Master Hotline. And what's the number for that, Rob?
The number is 774-203-4629.
That's 20D Hoax. RPG 20D Hoax.
774-203-4629. Call in, leave a message. You'll get to hear your voice on the air.
We've got several stacked up messages to play. We will get to those soon. Please call in with your question.
But yeah, thanks for listening, everybody. Let us know what you think. Engage with us. Leave us a rating and a review.
Hey, just if you share this podcast with one person who likes dungeon mastering or Dungeons and Dragons or thinking critically about those two things, that would make us incredibly happy. That's all we ask.
Thanks everybody again. Thank you, Matt. And we'll see you all next time. Keep rolling them dice.
This world doesn't need no opera. Here for the operation. We don't need bigger knife. Cause we got guns. We got guns. We got guns. We got guns. You better run. We're killing strangers. We're killing strangers. We're killing strangers so we don't kill the ones that we love. We're killing strangers. We're killing strangers. We're killing